If you think about the blue jay in your yard as the blue jay in your yard, it's your pet. It's your blue jay. You don't want something to happen to that blue jay. And just extend that to the rest of nature. That's where the caring comes from. We're very good at having pets. We love animals and we take care of them. And at the same time, we bury them with our bulldozers. It doesn't make any sense because we have no personal connection with the thousands of things that were killed in that pond when they did that. When you chop down that tree, all the things that are going to die, you have to realize what is in that tree before I chop it down. It could change our behaviors.
Welcome to the Passing Through Podcast, a show dedicated to exploring those spaces not just within, but also between and around us. The cracks in the walls, the moments between the moments. I speak with thinkers, authors, artists, teachers, and everyday humans who have touched the edge of the ordinary and found something to bring back. Sometimes you'll hear people say things like, "Don't sweat the small stuff," or "The little things don't matter, don't get hung up on those." And in this week's episode, I want to say that that couldn't be further from the truth. It is the little things that run the world. And in this episode, I had the honor to sit down with Doug Tallamy, who is an educator, an ecologist, a conservationist, an entomologist, an award-winning author. He's co-founder of the Homegrown National Park, which is a nonprofit organization that promotes habitat restoration and biodiversity on public and private lands. So Doug has been dedicating his life for decades to the study of the small stuff: bugs, caterpillars, moths, butterflies. I first came across his work when I read his wonderful book that I strongly recommend and will link in the show notes, called The Nature of Oaks. It was an illuminating read. It was humorous. It was informative. It was a joy to read. And after reading this book, I was so enchanted that I reached out to Doug, and he graciously made time in his schedule to sit down and talk to me. So if you want to learn more about bugs and about ways that you could make a difference in the places that you live and move, then this is going to be a great episode for you. We talk about a whole bunch of stuff, starting from mosquitoes to moths to light pollution to honoring and respecting the natural world, to the more challenging aspects of nature and the responsibility that we all have to be in service to the world around us. This was a beautiful conversation for me. I really enjoyed it despite being sick while I spoke with Doug. I'm still sick now, but I am able to talk for longer periods of time without coughing. So I am grateful for that too. All the links that you'll need to find Doug are going to be in the show notes. I don't want to prattle on any longer here because this was a fascinating conversation and I just want to get it into your ears as soon as possible. So to that effect, be good to one another, and I will talk to you next time. Okay, so Doug, welcome to the Passing Through Podcast. It is great to sit down and speak with you.
Well, I very much appreciate the opportunity.
I had an important first question as we begin here, and it is, as an entomologist, when a mosquito is in your house and it bites you, what do you do? Do you open the window and let in a bird or a bat?
The mosquitoes that are in our house biting us are introduced mosquitoes themselves. It's typically the Asian tiger mosquito. Very annoying. Doesn't belong here. We swat it. And it's typically biting my poor wife. She is much more attractive to mosquitoes and to me than I am. So she's always getting clobbered. Yes, we spot them.
Okay. It's actually not where I wanted to go. This was like a kind of light question at the beginning, but you just raised a point that I hadn't considered. Is it true that insects are attracted to some people more than others, or is this not true?
No, absolutely. They're attracted to the chemicals that your body's giving off. Research has shown they are really attracted to the smelly foot cheese smell.
Okay, that's why they like me so much.
And apparently some people give that off a lot more. In general, females are more attractive than males. I mean, I get bitten too, but she definitely gets bitten more than me. I have had ticks crawl off me at night and onto her because I don't know. So, but yes, it
Wow.
is true. There's some people a lot more attractive.
Okay. Thank you for that fun fact here at the beginning. The next question that I have for you is, how can we wage coordinated asymmetrical warfare on golf courses?
Um, okay, it's a good question. Justin Timberlake years ago bought a golf course and wanted to redesign it using native plants and all sustainable practices. I don't know what's happened with that. I don't know if he still owns it, but it's entirely possible. Yes, you have to manicure the green, but there are huge portions of golf courses that don't need to be highly manicured. You do not need to apply the insecticide load and the herbicide load that is typically applied. And more golf courses are getting greener. There was a study a while ago, and don't ask me to cite the author because I can't remember, but there was a correlation between the amount of time men spent walking on golf courses and prostate cancer.
Hmm.
You're walking over a lot of pesticides. So whether that was real or not, I don't know, but the correlation was there. And golf courses know that. It's also very expensive to have all those inputs. So the trees that are on golf courses, the plants, they can all be native or at least push it in that direction. So in other words, there's no inherent reason why golf courses can't be greener. Yes, they require grass, that's for sure. But it's not an all or nothing. We can move in the right direction without eliminating golf courses. You also want to, it depends on where the golf courses is. The biggest problem with golf courses in this country, in the West, is the water requirements.
Hmm.
We do not have the water. I mean, every day I read more and more about, the Colorado River is not only not reaching the sea, but it's not going to meet the demands that are already there, and they keep increasing them. We keep growing in the West. We don't have water for golf courses. We don't have water for lawns. We don't even have water for the industry or the cities that are already there. So everybody's, ignoring that, but huge problem, and it will surface in just a very few years.
Hmm. Yeah, water scarcity, water insecurity. I think people in the States are already seeing this. I think I remember something in Texas in recent times. I was reading about, I could be making that up. But the question I had for you about this is there a connection between water insecurity and the proliferation of invasive species? Is there a connection between those two things, or are these separate problems?
I would label them separate problems. We have invasive species problem because we bring them in, and whether we had water shortage or not, we would have invasive species issues.
Okay.
Particular species might thrive in drier climates. In the old days, they might not have, but that would be minor compared to the number of species that we're introducing into this country every year. I mean, right now we've got more than 3,300 species of plants that are established. We introduce a lot more than that. Many of them don't become established, but these are established. Many of them are serious invasives in our natural areas. And yeah, that doesn't have anything to do with the rain. What
Hmm.
it does have to do with is, well, certainly the fact that we're bringing them in, they're bringing them in without their natural enemies, but that includes the big mammalian herbivores. So when you introduce a plant into this country where we have severe deer overabundance, the deer eating the native plants and they're not eating the non-native plants. So what's left? The non-native plants.
Hmm.
If you remove deer, if you have deer exclusion experiments, our native plants are quite competitive with the invasives. But when you add deer to the mix, they don't have a chance. So it's really, you can't talk about invasive plants without talking about overabundance of deer. And removing the invasives without controlling the deer, just you spend a lot of time and money doing that, but the natives will not be able to recover because the deer eat every one that comes up. So that's a problem that has to be dealt with in unison.
Yeah, I like what you're speaking about here. It was actually my real first question that I had for you ties into this. So there were so many things that I loved about your book, The Nature of Oaks. I really enjoyed how enchanting and well written it was and how humorous it was. But what I appreciated most is how it drove home this idea that we're all connected in a vast web of socio-ecological relationship, which binds us deeply to plants and insects and everything else in that ecosystem. So what you're talking about now is how if we look at that system from the kind of historical, scientific, materialist perspective of looking at a thing in isolation, then you miss all of these other really vital pieces of the puzzle where if you're just targeting these invasive species and you're ignoring the deer, this isn't the way that this works, right? So you know much more about this than I do. I just have a very superficial understanding of this. Are there comprehensive plans or ways or theories for how people could have a more holistic way to deal with a problem like that?
Oh, it's been written about a lot. Alexander von Humboldt, hundreds of years ago, recognized that it was interaction diversity that was driving life on the planet, not single species. He was ignored for a couple hundred years, but it's resurfaced again in the 80s and 90s in the scientific literature. Hey, we need these interactions. But our societies, our culture has gone in the other direction where we feel we are not part of nature. We don't need it. We're totally disconnected from it. Whatever we need comes from Lowe's or Home Depot, and we're good. That's nonsense. We are products of nature. We're totally dependent on it, not just partially, but totally. And as ecosystems collapse around the world, it gets really nasty. We tend to think of it as social unrest, but it starts with ecosystem collapse. There was an interesting paper a while ago about the causes of the conflict in Syria.
Hmm.
In the last decades, there were 2 or 3 years of drought in a row, and the farming communities essentially collapsed. Those farmers all moved to cities. The cities couldn't handle them, and that led to the social unrest that the Syrian government cracked down, and we had years and years of war. But it started with an ecological issue. The human population on the planet is above the carrying capacity. That puts us in a very, very delicate relationship with the natural world that remains. Every time we increase the population, we require more ecosystem services, not fewer. But every time we increase it, we're degrading the planet more and having fewer. So it's a conflict that can only be resolved by reducing our population. And I know, very unpopular. This year, China's population decreased for 2 years in a row, and the headlines across the world were crisis. This is a crisis. Of course, it's economists writing these headlines. Capitalism is based on a Ponzi scheme. It's perpetual growth.
Mm-hmm.
I said in one book somewhere, we can grow as fast as the planet is growing, which is not very fast. We do not have more resources every day. Yes, technology can help. It can prolong the situation, but we need to become, we have to, we talk about the word sustainability. We've got to really think about what that means. It means you have a relationship with the resources that keep you on this planet that is sustainable. That means forever, not for the next 5 years. So we can't use resources faster than they are generated on the planet. They are generated on the planet, and we can improve the degree to which they're generated. There's many ways we can do that, but using it faster than they're generated it's never going to work. It's just never going to work.
I had a question about this. This is an interesting point that maybe you have more insights than I do. But I remember reading something that spoke about, it was interrogating this question. And it was thinking about, okay, we have this population, we have these finite resources. The way that we are arranging and distributing our global food supply chain in its current incarnation is woefully inefficient, mismanaged, terrible at feeding us. When you compare this to, let's say, historical, traditional peasant food webs, for example, that these were much better at feeding people. Everything was local. It was shared, sometimes gift economies, barter economies, they could subvert capitalism. Do you think that there's truth in this, that a huge portion of the problem is how we've configured the system today?
Well, in the old days, we lived where we could produce the resources we needed. We did not have millions of people in the middle of a desert where you couldn't farm, where there wasn't enough rain. Now we do. We look at the southwest of the US. Phoenix has been the fastest growing city in the country for years. Las Vegas, all these places are deserts, and they have to import not just the food. Everybody focuses on food. It's true. We grow enough food on this planet to feed everybody. It's not in the right place, and we have to move it around. But the real limiting factor, number one, would be water. And we're not going to move water around. We're not moving the Colorado River. People want to put a straw in the Great Lakes and pump the water down to the southwest. The Great Lakes have already passed, laws saying, nope, nobody's going to do that. Of course, we could nationalize it and do that, but it's basic resources like that that are more limiting than simply shipping containers of food to people that don't have it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that sums it up pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah. It goes back to water again. Everything seems to go back to water. And when I was reading your book,
that is one of the planetary boundaries. Somebody recently wrote a paper about the 6 planetary boundaries that are their constraints on future growth. And I think we've exceeded 5 of the 6, something like that. So water is definitely one of them. Biodiversity is one. It's biodiversity that runs the ecosystems that support us. But there are other things, phosphorus and fertilizers and stuff like that.
Yeah. Actually, this is a good segue into another question I had for you, because speaking of the things that are running the system, from reading The Nature of Oaks, I got the impression that insects are a huge component of our ecosystems. And often to many of us, they're just these kind of buzzing background nuisances that we don't even think about or pay attention to. But when I was reading your book, they didn't seem like background noise. They seemed more like a core component of the orchestra. And I wonder, when did you have that realization where you said, oh, wow, these things are so essential?
Well, reading E.O. Wilson's 1987 paper, The Little Things That Run the World, helped a lot. I am an entomologist. And in 1987, I had been an entomologist for, 12 years already. But I was one of those people. Insects were enormously interesting. I was essentially a behavioral ecologist. I was studying how and why they do what they do, how they interacted with plants. But I had not internalized the degree to which they were vital for terrestrial ecosystems. So that was one of E.O. Wilson's great gifts to the world, is that he helped us see these very plain things. And he said clearly, life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, so would 90% of our flowering plants. And if our flowering plants disappeared, food webs that support our terrestrial animals, mostly the vertebrates, the amphibians, the reptiles, the birds, the mammals, those food webs would all collapse. All those animals would disappear. And by the way, humans are mammals, and we would disappear as well. The decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients are largely insects. And if they disappeared, he said the earth would rot because all we would have is bacteria and fungi. So yes, insects are vital. We have had an undeclared war against insects forever, largely because, many of them eat the crops that we have out there. So we want to get rid of all of them. But if we succeed in doing that, and we are succeeding in doing that, we got global insect decline. It is one of our most serious environmental issues. Starting to get some press, but most people don't realize that. It's going to get very, very nasty. We've got to have the insects that move the energy from plants to other animals. That's one of their major roles. Plants, the first trophic level, are capturing energy from the sun and turning it into food. That's the food that supports us, but it supports everything else as well. Most animals don't eat plants directly. Most animals eat most vertebrates eat invertebrates that ate those plants. And most of those invertebrates are insects, and not only insects, they're specific insects. Most of those invertebrates are caterpillars. So caterpillars turn out to be enormously important in transferring energy from plants to other animals. They are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. What does that mean? It means we need to design landscapes that support a lot of caterpillars. We do just the opposite. We use plants that caterpillars can't eat. If we see a caterpillar, we spray it or squish it, and then we lose the birds. A single nest of chickadees takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars just to get the babies to the point where they leave the nest. Who's going to make those caterpillars? Where are they coming from? They're not coming from your lawn. They're not coming from your crepe myrtle. They're not coming from the ginkgo. They're not coming from any of the non-native plants that we decorate our landscapes with. They're not coming from the invasive species that have pushed out our natives in our natural areas. They're coming from plants like oaks. You've mentioned oaks. They're the primary producer of caterpillars, but there are many other important plant genera too. So those are the ones we have to make sure are in our landscapes so that we continue to have the animal diversity that helps to run our ecosystems.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. This was a deep insight for me when I was reading your book. I'm nearly 40. I'll be 40 this year. And your book was helping me build basic literacy about the natural world around me that I didn't have, that somehow eluded me this entire time, despite the fact that I've been spending the last years working on farms, and I should have realized these things, but I never realized that the overwhelming majority of insects are not generalists, that they're specialists, and they can only eat very specific plants, and that they've adapted over time and learned to kind of disable their chemical defenses to be in relationship with those plants. And for some reason, this is obvious now after I read it and after I reflect on things I had seen on the farm, is where, as you said, they tend to eat specific crops. Like, you'll have a whole bunch of kale that's just riddled with bullet holes from all of the aphids or whatever is on them eating them. And yeah, I think for a lot of us, lay people like me, we just think, oh, there's so many plants. The bugs have a feast. There's just so much abundance. But actually, that's not true.
Well, you shouldn't beat up on yourself for not knowing this. You should have been taught this from kindergarten on up. It should be part of our culture that we need these living things around us. So, yeah, I should have figured it out 20 years before I actually did. But we shouldn't have to go through personal discovery for these basic rules of life. It should be part of our culture that everybody knows about.
Yeah, agreed. That's a failure of our educational systems. And I think also it's a failure of the imagination, of wonder, of maybe eros, in the sense of not erotic love, but of love for the world around us. And that's what I liked about your book. It shed light on so many fascinating things that helped re-enchant the world and make it more magical and more wondrous, because it really is. Even, the light eaters, that's a magical thing, that sunlight comes and there's these little creatures that can eat light, and then everything comes up from this relationship with it and the light. But in your book with oaks, speaking about this ancient relationship between jays and oaks, and how this collaboration helped oaks spread all across the world over the millions and millions of years that they've existed. So do you have certain things that you find really enchanting or magical that could give people this sense of wonder? Maybe something you haven't shared before on a podcast, or maybe one that you have that you really like.
Oh boy, there's so many. It's hard for me to think that way because I was born loving nature. It just inherently was fascinating to me. All of it, the salamander, the box turtle, the things that I could encounter as a little boy, the pollywogs, the frogs. I didn't know anything about insects until I took a course in college. So most of my youth was spent with other forms of nature, just animals. I didn't know anything about plants either and didn't care about them. So, big gap there. But if you find everything fascinating, it's hard to pick out one and say, I I've been interested in moths and their caterpillars for several years now. And I recently had a couple trips to Peru. I was writing a book about how moths protect themselves from their predators, largely through crypsis. They're hiding right in plain sight. But even after being an entomologist for many decades and being exposed to a lot of really fascinating things, I just stood there with my mouth open with some of the things I saw in Peru. There are moths that look exactly like lightning bugs, like fireflies, not just from the top, but if you flip them over, they've got a phony lantern on their abdomen as well. Not only that, they smell like lightning bugs too, which is that's the chemical that protects lightning bugs from predators. So it's a complete mimicry in three types of senses. That I don't know, just amazes me. How does that evolve? There are moths that have spider legs designs on their wings, so when they raise their wings up, they look exactly like a spider. All kinds of moths that look like sticks and lichens and dead leaves. Really incredible dead leaf mimics where part of the wing looks like it's been skeletonized, eaten out by an insect. The other part looks like it's been smeared with mud. And these are butterflies that sit on the ground. So there's just no way you would see that. But the degree to which nature has designed these things to blend in with their background is absolutely jaw dropping. So I'll share that. I don't know if I've shared that with anybody else, but
Cool, thank you. Yeah, the moths are very interesting. That story stayed with me from the book. I even shared it on this podcast about Trouvelot, this French guy who came and introduced I know they're not called gypsy moths anymore, but I forget the
spongy moth.
Spongy moth.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really, it's a terrible story on one hand, but it's an empowering story on the other to know that one person can have such an impact on an ecosystem.
Yeah. Hitler had a big impact too. So did Napoleon,
Yeah. Yeah, but for a global people that feel so disenchanted and disempowered and despairing, I succumb to those feelings too sometimes. To be able to subvert a story like that and be like, well, the bright side of it is that we do have so much ability to influence and care for things and repair and be stewards instead of pests.
Right. Well, I mean, look at Rachel Carson. One woman at a time when women were not in science, not respected. They weren't respected, period, but they certainly weren't respected as scientists, who recognized a serious problem, wrote about it, endured the onslaught of criticism from the pesticide industry. But she persisted. That one book, Silent Spring, essentially saved our raptors from extinction and went a long way to creating the Environmental Protection Agency. This was one woman. Now there were, she used research from a number of scientists, but they weren't getting it out to the public. She took it to the public that then made it happen. So there's two stories there. One woman did it, but she used the strength of public opinion to actually change many laws in the US, across the world, actually. So that's my take right now. It is the public who's the future of conservation right now, because it's the public that owns most of the world. Certainly in the US, almost 80% of the country is privately owned. So conservation has to happen on private property, and that's not going to happen unless the private landowner recognizes his and her responsibility to treating their little piece of the earth, not just with respect, but we have to use the knowledge that we have to landscape these properties so that we have functional ecosystems everywhere. This is a bigger problem every day because more and more people move to cities. We've got almost 80% of the US population in cities who are not interacting with nature in any kind of meaningful way. They don't know we have a biodiversity crisis. They certainly don't know what they can do to help solve it. So this is why we do these podcasts. This is why we're talking to people all the time. We have the ability to communicate ideas now instantaneously. We can get kids in East Timor to wear the certain brand of sneakers if we want to, with a certain type of advertising. So we really can change public opinion. We can change culture using the social media that we now have. But we have to be motivated to do that. and we have to do it. I look at the top 10 things that people are concerned about when it comes time to vote, and they're all legitimate concerns. But sometimes near the bottom, climate change gets up onto that list. But biodiversity crisis and environmental decay is typically not on the list, as if it's not important. We like nature, but we don't think it's essential. And that is our downfall right now. We've got to elevate it way up on that list because it is absolutely essential, and its decay causes most of the other problems that people are worried about.
Yeah, well said. I don't know what book. It might have been in a book called Environment by Charles Eisenstein that I read a long time ago. But he made a similar point where he was saying, yeah, these ecosystems like our wetlands, our forests, they are more than ecosystems. They are like organs for the earth, that they have a function. They're very important. They're vital. And if you think of the earth as a living system, which I do, and you think of it as something similar to our own, then we have vital organs inside of us that if you just removed both of your kidneys,
Yep.
now you have nothing to filter the toxins through your body. And this is going to be a fatal problem. And if we treat our earth with the kind of disrespect and carelessness and extractive, predatory way that we've been treating it, we are effectively destroying its organs, and then we're destroying us too, because like you said, we are extensions of nature. We need nature to sustain us. And so it's in our interest to care for it. So it's so foolish that we have lost, it comes from disconnection, right? Seeing ourselves as separate. Again, what you were speaking about at the beginning. And I wonder what tips, because you probably get asked this a lot, what tips do you have for people who, this target demographic that you were just describing, people in cities who are curious, they hear this and they go, oh, they're talking about interesting things. Like, I like clean water, I like clean air, I like animals, I like squirrels, depending on if they're orange squirrels or gray squirrels or where you are in the world.
Right.
I know they're invasive in some places and not others, but, what do they do if they don't have some land of their own? How can they contribute? How can they help?
Yeah. Well, there's a whole bunch of things. I don't separate it into people in cities versus non-cities. I talk about the choir versus the non-choir. So people who get it, and there are a lot of people who get it, but there are a lot more who don't. So my real target audience is the non-choir, the people that don't already know this. I go around, I give talks, I write books. Who reads them? The choir. Who invites me to give a talk? The choir. So the real trick is, how do you reach that person that does not know this is an issue, doesn't care about it because they don't know, they don't realize how important it is. They don't have that inherent fascination with nature. It's not that they couldn't develop it, but it's, they didn't seem to be born with it. How do you reach that group? That's the biggest voting block. And that's my real target audience. And I don't have an answer to that. I keep trying new things. We do podcasts, we write books, we talk, we make documentaries, we do everything we possibly can to get this into the public consciousness. But back to your question, what can you do if you're in a city? If you own no land at all and you live in an apartment complex, you may, not everybody, but a lot of those people in apartment complexes have balconies. You can use container plantings on your balcony that would go a long way to helping pollinators in cities. And we're talking about native plants that bloom. On our website, homegrownnationalpark.org, we have a section on what are the best plants for containers in all the ecoregions of the U.S. So finding or knowing which plant is going to do well in your container is now not an issue. Just go to the website and say, here it is. But that's your responsibility. You are going to help with conservation by container gardening on your little balcony. Is it going to be as powerful as Ted Turner, who owns half of New Mexico? No. But there's a lot of people in the city, and everybody did it. It turns that pile of bricks into a green resource. We write off our cities as if there's nothing we can do. But all I say is go to Singapore, which truly is the most green city in the world. It has become a priority and has been for the last 30 years. Singapore is green from top to bottom. It is a thriving city with millions of people. But people go to Singapore for ecotourism because there's so many animals and birds there. And it's because of the way they designed it and the fact that it was important to them. So it can't be done. It can be done, but we can't have cement as the default landscape. We have to use plants effectively. We have to use the plants that support biodiversity. And of course, it's a wonderful thing for our health, for our exposure. Crime goes down when you put more plants in a city. Your blood pressure goes down. Your stress level goes down. Your cortisol goes down. And when you are less stressed, everything is better. You heal better. You're friendlier. You get divorced less. I mean, all these factors have been measured, believe it or not, when you simply put plants into a city. Why aren't we doing that? We are doing it. I don't want to paint it as all negative. There's the heat island effect. The more plants you get in a city, the lower the heat island effect. So a lot of cities have goals of getting more plants into their spaces. So really, it's not all black. We're moving in the right direction. I want to see us move faster,
Mm-hmm.
and we will move faster if we reach more of the non-choir, which is why you and I are talking.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. That really illustrates things pretty succinctly and clearly. And I think you're right that we do need to reach those people, and that's a huge gap to bridge. And yeah, it's very important work. So I'm glad that you are dedicating your your life to that kind of work, because that's a beautiful thing.
Let me mention one more thing that's very easy for anybody to do, whether you're in a city or not. We talked about global insect decline. One of the major causes of insect decline is light pollution,
Hmm.
particularly of the moths that make the caterpillars that run the food webs in terrestrial ecosystems. They're nocturnal, and they're attracted to the lights that we have on at night. And many of them don't go away from those lights. And it's distracting them from what they ought to be doing, which is finding their host plant and mating and making more moths. So light pollution is a major cause of insect decline, but it has a really simple solution. Of course, you can turn your light out. That's very easy, and it really works. But if you're worried about security, you can put a motion sensor on your external light so that it only turns on when the bad man comes. But even easier is to take the white bulb out and use a yellow bulb or an amber bulb. Yellow wavelengths do not attract nocturnal insects. And
Hmm.
it's not, you can go to the hardware store now and buy what's called a bug light. Make people think, oh, if I buy this, it's going to kill my insects. No, it's going to actually save your insects because they're not attracted to it. So, I mean, that's a very simple change. It's a cultural change, though, because rather than bright white lights at night, it's going to be bright yellow lights.
Yeah.
Uh, but that's something everybody can do. They can do it today, and it would have a major effect on insect decline.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I had two simultaneous thoughts. One was a memory. When I was a kid in New York, I remember in summer at nighttime, we'd be out and we'd be walking around. And, as you do when you're like a 13-year-old boy with the whole night ahead of you in the summer, looking for trouble and mischief and all that stuff. And I would remember the amount of moths. There was a parking lot, and the lights, I guess the municipal lights, were on all night long. So even if the homeowners did this stuff, cool, that's taking down one vector. But then those lights in these municipal spaces were so much brighter and so much bigger, and there would be a cloud of moths just beating themselves against these lights all night long. And I don't see that same number of moths anymore. But when I was a kid, it was like a cone of moths. It was so surreal to remember it, and I hadn't thought about it until you were just sharing that. So I guess the impact has already been pretty devastating to these animals.
It has. The good news is, though, that insect populations are very good at increasing quickly when you give them the right conditions. I'll use up my own property. I should say our own. My wife lives here too. As an example, I mean, there was a farm that was broken up into 10-acre lots in southeast Pennsylvania. And we got one of those lots. It had been mowed for hay and been farmed for 300 years. So not much here. But our job was to, put back the eastern deciduous forest that was once here. And we've been here 25 years now, but I've been counting the number of moth species that I have photographed on our property. And I'm still at it because I keep getting new ones. But I'm up to 1,366 species that are here now because we put the host plants that they need back. And we also don't We don't turn our lights on at all. We don't need to. There's just no reason to. So they respond, is my point. You really can rebuild populations if we simply stop killing them.
Hmm. Yeah. Just going to honor that with a little silence because I think that's a strong truth there.
Oh, let me add to that. Because we've got so much bird food on our property, we've recorded 62 species of birds that have bred on our property. The nest has been on our property. That's a lot of bird species. And they're here because there's enough food to rear their young. So it doesn't stop with the insects. It goes right up the food web. We have the nesting passerines, but we also have the predatory birds. we've got red-shouldered hawks, and we've got sharp-shinned hawks, and we've got Cooper's hawks. Eagles have flown over top, but they haven't ever stopped here. So we have a number of trophic levels that all start with the plants we have chosen to put back on our properties.
Hmm. Yeah, going back to the interrelated nature of all things. And there is one thing I wanted to talk with you about, which I think now is a relevant time, given we're speaking about moths and caterpillars and butterflies. I wanted to talk about metamorphosis because it's not just a book by Franz Kafka. It's a pretty magical thing that I don't quite understand. How do caterpillars turn into butterflies? I was wondering if you could explain that like I've had 5 shots of moonshine, because that's how I feel today. Like imaginal cells, I know the name, but this whole thing seems very mystical and strange, and it is. But I wonder, can you shed a little bit of light on how that works?
Not really. I mean, not in the way that you're asking for. I'm not an insect physiologist, and it is, to a non-physiologist, it is pretty magical. But of course, metamorphosis, you're talking about complete metamorphosis, where they go from an egg to a larva. The reason they do that is to specialize on what each life stage is supposed to do. The larva is supposed to grow. It is an eating machine. We'll go back to caterpillars. A typical caterpillar hatches out of the eggs, and it will increase its weight 10,000 times before it reaches adulthood. How
Hmm.
does it do that? By eating all the time. And that's pretty much all it does. The adult specializes in reproduction. But in order to do that, they have to move around to find mates. They have to move around to find the host plants. So they need an entirely different morphology. This is where the wings come in, different body plan. So what's in between? It's that pupal stage where everything, almost everything, not the gonads, but everything in the larval stage dissolves in the pupal stage and then reorganizes. And you talked about imaginal disc, yeah, into the structures that create adult morphology. When you think about what it took for that to evolve, pretty incredible. How that happens? Well, it's genetically controlled. I have no idea how that happens. It really is it's a fascinating and it's a wonderful thing that it does happen. The most successful insects in the world in terms of number of species and numbers are those holometabolous insects, the ones with complete metamorphosis. So it's been a really successful adaptation that has allowed the insects to be the little things that run the world, that allows us to be here as well. So
That's a new insight for me on butterflies and how basically they spend half of their lives as eating machines and then the other half of their lives as mating machines. So I guess it's a pretty good deal to be reincarnated as a butterfly.
yes. Until somebody squishes you, then it's not such a good idea.
Yeah, until a beautiful bird comes along and then that's it. Yeah, that's actually a funny thing. Have you ever put yourself in the shoes, trying to hit you with a unique question. Have you ever put yourself in the shoes of an insect meeting a bird? Because for us, birds are these beautiful creatures full of song and flight and wonder and color and intrigue. But for a worm or a caterpillar, even a spider, which is a predator, a bird is like a dinosaur. It's a raptor, right? So What have you learned from trying to put yourself in the shoes of an insect thinking about birds?
I haven't thought exactly the way you're describing it, but I have tried to teach my students through the 45 years I've been at the University of Delaware to think like an insect that is your study organism. If you're trying to design an experiment to figure out why a lace bug will lay its eggs in the egg mass of another lace bug, you have to think like that lace bug. Now, of course, it's not thinking like us, but what would be the advantage or the disadvantage? So I have thought, put myself, just what does this insect need to do to survive? And then it really becomes, it's far less mysterious. But you're right. I have not said what happens when the bird comes down. You know what happens? It's over really fast. I have seen, insects, particularly caterpillars, don't want to be eaten by those birds, so they do everything they can to protect themselves. And one of the things is they will cover their bodies with hair. Birds don't like hairy caterpillars or spines. Some of them have little poison sacs at the base of them. But a hungry bird will still take that hairy caterpillar or the spiny one, and it sits on a branch and it just whacks it, and it whacks till all the hair is off, until all the spines are gone, and then it'll eat it anyway. So it slows them down. But yes, birds are formidable predators for the poor insects.
Yeah, yeah. I was also shocked, and I don't know if disgusted is the right word. It's probably not the right word. Horrified, maybe, when I was reading your book and learning about these insects that will. I think they were like a certain kind of wasp, where they will take a caterpillar, sting it, and it gets into a paralyzed state where it just gets slowly devoured from the inside by the egg that was laid in it when it got stung, and how this is basically the technology that insects evolved in the absence of refrigeration. And I was going, oh my God, like, what a horrific way to go.
Yeah, but it does make sense. Otherwise, if you killed that caterpillar before you laid the egg in it, it would rot before the egg even hatched, and then you don't have food. So they had to come up with a mechanism to have fresh food in the absence of refrigeration. I think it's a good analogy. So paralyzing the prey item is a great way to do it.
Hmm. It wasn't on my list of things to talk to you about, but we've just come here organically and I'll roll with it. Often I hear narratives from, nature enthusiasts, environmentalists, even myself at times. I can wax a little bit poetic about nature and romanticize it, focusing solely on the beauty of nature. And to me, that's a bit, and I wonder what your thoughts are. That's a bit of a misrepresentation of nature, because nature isn't just beauty, right? Nature is also death. Nature is pain. Nature is getting an egg laid inside of you and laying paralyzed as you're devoured for 5 days. So, is there a disservice that we do to nature by conscripting it or confining it to a very narrow definition? And then when it doesn't fit within that definition, if something is ugly or it isn't pretty, it needs to be controlled or changed so that it conforms to a beauty standard. I don't know where I'm going with this question, but there's something in there that wants to be explored.
Yeah, it is an interesting question, and I have never been asked that before. So there, you've accomplished it. Um, but yes, we find certain parts of nature really fascinating. We love butterflies. Why? Because they're pretty. We don't love moths so much because a lot of them are just brown and not so pretty. But in terms of function, moths are much more functional than butterflies. Butterflies are terrible pollinators and they taste bad. They're essentially day flying moths, so they're not contributing much to food webs because they don't taste good. But we like them because they're pretty. But in the old days, it was nature that killed us. Through much of our evolution, the vast majority of evolution, we had to fight against nature to survive. So Wilson's biophilia, our inherent love of nature, that is tempered by our inherent fear of nature. Because if we didn't survive in the past. And our efforts to control it make evolutionary sense. You had to control the predator populations and the things that were actually picking you off way back in the old days, or you got picked off, or you had to live in a way that minimized the chances of that happening. And that was the way it was for millions of years. So our efforts to control the landscape, recreate that savanna like landscape of Africa with a few trees and grasslands, it makes sense. That's where you could climb that tree quickly when you saw the lion, and you could see your enemies. Most of our enemies were other people, other tribes coming to get us. You could see them way before they got there. It was a safer environment than the closed canopy forest, which was very difficult to do those things. So our cautious relationship with nature makes evolutionary sense. The problem is it doesn't make any evolutionary sense when you've got 8.3 billion people on the planet, because we can caution ourselves against nature right to the point where we collapse. We need nature at the same time that we fear it. So the problem is we have changed the dynamics between humans and the environment so fast that the behavioral genetics behind our inherent feelings haven't caught up. We're still essentially hunter-gatherer societies that are wary of the nature around us. We needed it at the same time. We had to hunt the bison and the water buffalo and everybody else successfully, or we died. But I don't know. I I think I have made my point. But you can understand that it's not simply about making nature beautiful. That's a wonderful thing to do. But nature's red in tooth and claw, right? So,
Thanks for that great quote there. I'm going to use that. Very, very beautiful illustration. And I guess magic and beauty were also topics I wanted to explore, because the aesthetic beauty of an insect, when looked at closely, there are these colorful, varied, diverse creatures, almost like these exotic birds of paradise in their color and shape. And it's pretty. In your book, that was one of the first times I was looking at insects up close like that and seeing their colors and all of this stuff. And I was thinking that whatever created this cosmos must have either discovered psychedelics right before or while they were making insects, because they are these magical little creatures of wondrous shape and size and color and ability. And they can see colors we can't see. They can hear sounds and make sounds that are like unfathomable to us. They can smell things that we can't. So I wonder if you have any little magical things to share about insects, like in your own journey, that were really these doorways into beauty and magic for you that drew you deeper into nature.
well, of course, that beauty and magic has always been there. What allowed me access to it was the microscope, the stereoscope. Of course, as a student and graduate student in entomology at Rutgers University, the very first course I took was insect taxonomy. And they said, okay, here's the insect collection, here's the microscope, and the next test is in 2 months. So there was no lecture. You had to take these specimens and you had to look at them closely under the microscope, and you had to figure out how the key worked. And it was a wonderful way to learn it because you could move at your own pace, and you could, everybody learns differently. So you could focus on your best learning techniques. But you spent hours and hours and hours with insects on pins under a microscope. And of course, right away, you discover all that magic that you're talking about. It is incredible beauty, structural beauty. So we talk about moths and butterflies. The colors come from scales that are affixed to the wings. The scales can either be pigmented or they can have structural colors. Blues, for example, are structural colors based on little ridges that are in each scale. And the light that's reflected comes to our eyes as blue light. Just that is true for hairs and scales all over insect bodies, very strange configurations. It's another entire world that you discover when you put an insect under a microscope. And of course, the movie industry has capitalized on this with, remember, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. What were the things that were after the kids? They were scorpions, and they were big insects and ants, and it took that world and made it as big as it is when you look at it under the microscope. And it really is fascinating that way.
I never knew that they were scales on the wings. And the question I had, I forgot as a kid. This is a fun conversation for me because I'm getting these old memories. It's strange how as children we're much more immersed or
Inquisitive. You're inquisitive, what
yeah.
is this all about? Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess we're lower to the ground. We're crawling around in the grass and we're getting into trouble. And as we get older, we get higher and taller away from the ground. Maybe this has something to do with it, but yeah, that inquisitiveness as well. But I remember touching a butterfly as a kid or a moth and this like powdery substance being on my fingers. And so are these scales that are made of like little crystals or what is that?
No, they're not made of crystals. They're called macrotrichia. The scales on a butterfly wing are affixed much more firmly. So you can touch a butterfly without getting a lot of scales on you. Moth scales are very loose. So when you touch it, they typically do come off in your hand. There's a reason for that. Remember, most moths are flying at night. And what do? They fly into a spider web. If their scales can detach very easily, they can flutter out of that spider web quite
Hmm.
quickly. The butterflies during the day typically can avoid it. But that's one of the ways you can tell a butterfly from a moth. The scales come off easily. They're little pancake-like structures. Again, you can Google it. They'll blow it up and show you how they work, and they attach at one end to the wing. If you remove scales from the wing of an insect, it's hyaline. It's clear. You can see right through it. The way you can see through a fly's wings. The fly doesn't have any scales on the wings.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's just scales and hairs on insect body typically give them their coloration.
And do those scales grow back or are they
Oh,
permanently lost?
yeah. Anything in the adult stage does not grow back. So this is again, it's
Ah.
complete metamorphosis. These are arthropods, so they have an exoskeleton which is fixed. It doesn't change. That's why they have to molt. That's why they have to go through at least 5 molts as a larva, because as they grow, their exoskeleton doesn't grow. So they have to get rid of it and form a new one that is bigger. So I hear people talk about a baby fly. The baby fly does not become a big fly. You only can grow in the larval stage. A small fly is a small species as an adult. It's not going to get any bigger.
Ah.
So
Okay.
anything, if you lose a leg, if you lose an antenna, if you lose some of the scales on the wings, it's gone.
So this is the drawback to all of that unlimited eating and reproducing. It's like having adult teeth. If you knock it out, it's not growing
Yeah,
back.
that's exactly right. You only get one shot at it. Yeah.
Okay.
Of course, invertebrates. If you're a lizard, you can grow your tail back. You can fix certain body parts. So there's an advance that way.
Hmm. And one thing that I'm curious that I'm thinking about just because it's stirring in me are these thoughts of childhood and being in the grass and having that moment, the first time that you touch a moth or I guess only a moth. You said butterflies don't do this, but touching a moth and getting that powdery stuff on your fingers. Do you have any early memories of stuff like that when you think back and go, wow, that was a really enchanting thing that I haven't thought about in a while or never spoke about before? Does anything come to mind since it's in the space here?
Not in exactly the sense you're talking about, but I remember during finals week in college, it was warm, and I was studying outside in the grass, and I had my white papers down. This was before phones or computers or anything else. It was all handwritten on paper. If you leave a white piece of paper on the ground and you look over in just a few minutes, it's filled with insects. All these columbolins and other things are hopping across it and walking across it. And it was another whole world that you could discover simply by putting a white piece of paper on the ground that, I hadn't thought about. I knew. Look, columbolins are called springtails. They're tiny little insects that are on the ground. They can be there by the hundreds of thousands. And I knew they existed, but how many were there? Are they really right in my lawn? Yeah, that was a discovery just by putting a piece of white paper on the ground. When I was real little, we had big Japanese beetle outbreaks, and they were eating everybody's roses. So I remember my mother giving us a jar, and we would go pick off the Japanese beetles and put it in the jar. I do remember making a little insect collection with pins that were way too big. But you stick it through the insects you could collect, and then you had your little collection, which didn't last very long. But those were my earliest experiences with insects. It's funny, I'm so fascinated with moths now, and the giant silk moths are the most fascinating because they're large and they're beautiful. I went through my entire youth without ever encountering one of those, and if I had, I probably would have changed my direction right then and there. But it wasn't until college again that I actually encountered Promethea moths and Cecropia moths and imperial moths. Just fascinating things.
And what is it about the silk moths that attract you more than the others?
They're large, they're beautiful. You can rear them. They're big enough that they become part of our world immediately. We don't need that microscope to appreciate them. I'm not sure. They're just fascinating. But people all over the world are fascinated with giant silk moths. There's a whole silk moth rearing industry, people trading species. And so I'm not the only one that loves them.
Hmm. And can you do anything with the silk that they produce, or would you need to be having a massive farm of them to do anything with that silk?
This is where the spongy moth got us into trouble. That was to create a new silk industry. The Bombyx mori is the silk moth, which is a different family. It is not a giant silk moth. And that is a silk that we actually use we unravel the cocoons and make clothing out of it. But yes, people have tried to do it with polyphemus moths and some other species because they do use a lot of silk to make their cocoons. For some reason, it just has never been as useful for clothing. It never worked. People have tried, but it never worked. So they call giant silk moths simply because they do make their cocoon. All the moths make their cocoon out of silk, but these are big ones. So that's where the name comes from. Not that they're actually part of the silk industry.
Hmm. What do those eat? Because I guess they're native to a specific region in the world, and everybody just can't start encouraging these moths to come. I'm just thinking if they're larger, they would provide, I guess, more biomass to birds, and then it cascades up the chain and could be great for an ecosystem. But maybe this is a naive understanding of how that works.
That is how that works, but they're never very common. So what do they eat? It depends on the species. There are hundreds of species throughout the world. Where I live, we've got the Cecropia moth that largely eats black cherry. We've got the Polyphemus moth that largely eats oaks. We've got the Io moth. That's a little bit more polyphagous. It eats. You'd probably find it on cherry or willow. What else do we have? The Luna moth is a specialist on sweet gum where I live. So you have to know what it is you're after, and put in the plant that it supports. There are a lot of Saturniids, the giant silk moths in the tropics, so you have a lot of choices there. But yes, you can plant those plants, and yes, those moths will come. When the leaves of one of my oak trees this fall finally dropped enough, I saw that there's one that didn't drop. Oh, look, it's a polyphemus cocoon. It's hanging from the branch. I said, this is great. I'll follow this all winter, and maybe I can see it emerge in the spring. Well, I went out after one of our big windstorms, and it wasn't there anymore. So it actually blew off. Where is it? It's in my flower bed with 1,000 other leaves, a million other leaves. And it's one of the reasons we shouldn't rake all the leaves away from our beds. There are living things in there. It'll still emerge. It'll be fine, but I can't find it because it's hiding amongst all the other leaves that look exactly the same. So I do have them on my property because I have planted the plants that support them, and other people can do that as well. This gets back to light pollution, though. Those guys come to lights and they don't survive. So you're not going to have giant silk moths if you don't control your light pollution.
Okay. So these are also practical tips for people. Control your lights, don't rake your leaves. And if you want to attract these guys, make sure that you put some native food for them if that's your region, and you could have them visit you. It's funny when I think about that. That's in a way like it sounds like ancient pagan wisdom of like make an offering. You're making an offering and you're inviting the spirit of this insect to come, and you're entering into relationship with it through your own attention and care by nurturing something to feed it. You're literally making it an offering, and then it can come and grace you with its beauty and its presence. So there's something beautifully ancient and practical. It's like a practical reverence for this creature.
Absolutely. I don't want to be sacrilegious, but it's your little chance to play God. If you're starting with a blank landscape, you can control what is going to live there by controlling the plants that you plant there. And I've marveled at the number of species that have come to our property because we put the plants back. So it wasn't very hard to play God, but it really works. They come back, and then you're just crawling with life everywhere.
Being in that relationship with these creatures, you're taking actions, you're planning things, you're nurturing an ecosystem, you're kind of cultivating certain creatures to appear. For you, what has it been like to work closely with these insects and plants? And how does it change the way that you perceive like your own belonging in the world? Like, do you see yourself as God? Or I don't get that impression. Or do you see yourself as, what are you? What?
Yeah, no, I do not see myself as God. But the simple relationships between plants and the insects and the birds that need them, that I have seen, that have come to light from our property, really, it changed the direction of my research, and it changed the goals of the rest of my life. And that is to see how powerful a single landscape can be in this biodiversity crisis. What can each person do? I've seen it work on our property, and right away, I had to get this message to other people because they simply didn't know. It's not that they didn't want to do it; it's that they had no idea. Most people think nature's happy someplace else. I say, no, it's not happy someplace else, but you can make it happy on your property by doing this and this. There are so many people these days that do have enough knowledge to recognize the planet has real issues, but they all feel powerless. What can one person do? Well, I got a whole list of things one person can do on their little piece of their earth and revitalize their local ecosystem and see it happen. If I say we've got climate change issues and you've got to stop driving your SUV and put solar panels on your house and do all of that, great things to do, but you won't see a difference. It's because it's such a tiny little speck of the entire giant problem. But if you plant that oak tree in your yard, you will see a difference right away. You can appreciate the change that it's made, and that is empowering. The relationship with what's happened on our property and the power of the individual is what has impressed me the most. And also what's impressed me is that people are ready to do this. The reason I wrote my very first book, Bringing Nature Home, is because people were asking me to do it. They said, we want to read about this. I said, there's nothing to read. He said, well, they asked me that for a year. And I finally said, I'll write a pamphlet. And the pamphlet got a little long, but it was the first time in my career that I was actually doing research on something the public cared about. And I really liked that. Not only did they care about it, but they cared about something that was vitally important. So it satisfied, I got to scratch that itch that I'd never had. I used to study, how does a cucumber beetle choose its mate? It's really fascinating stuff. David Attenborough came and filmed. It was all great, but nobody cares how a cucumber beetle chooses its mate. People do care about the future of the planet, and that has been enormously rewarding to me to help pass on what people need to know, the simple things they can do right on their property to really make a difference.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm also curious to dig in about it's called a cucumber beetle. And David Attenborough, that sounds like that's an interesting story there. But before we do, maybe we could come back to it. There was something I wanted to check with you on, because right now I'm in a year-long course on myth and animism and ancient indigenous cosmologies and land practices and stuff like this. Very fascinating, interesting stuff. And as I was listening to you speak right now, you've dedicated your life to what I would call attention. Like you are going into a space, and what we're focusing on in this course right now is listening. And what you're doing is you're going into a space and you're listening, sometimes with the tools that you have, your sight, your sound, your smell, sometimes with tools that humans have created, like microscopes and other devices, I'm sure. But what you're doing is you're going into a space, you're paying attention, you're listening, you're making observations, and you are in relationship and dialogue with the world around you, with the intelligent, animate life around you. So I have two questions about that. One, do you relate to, or is there a certain resonance with animism? And the second question is there something ethical that happens? Like, when does it become ethical? Like, you're giving your attention and you're listening. Is there a moment where this becomes something you feel you have a duty to do, to honor these creatures?
I think those are the feelings I was born with. I think from my earliest days, my earliest perceptions, I honored nature. It was just, I felt part of it right away. One thing I didn't share with you, I have shared a number of other times, but when I was in third grade, we moved to a new house and a new development. There was a pond right next to our house, and I used to go there every day and see what was happening. And that was my first real intense interaction with nature. And in the spring, the toads came and they sang and they mated and they laid eggs, and the pillarwags grew, and the little the tail shortened and the little legs popped out, and the baby toads were ready to hop out onto the land. And I wanted to be there the day that happened. And I was there the day that happened, but that also was the day that the bulldozer came and buried that whole thing. So it did make an impression on me. I desperately wanted to save those little creatures. I didn't think about why I wanted to save those little creatures. They were living creatures. They were my pets, I guess. I don't know. What's interesting to me is I could have gone across to my backyard and dug another pond. My parents probably would have helped me, but it never occurred to me. Never occurred to me. What occurred to me is we have to save nature before humans destroy it. Yes, and that's been our conservation model for the last century, but it's not good enough because we're destroying it much faster than we're saving it. So what we need to do is move beyond conservation into restoration, and that's where my focus has been now. But what you said earlier reminds me of the relationship that indigenous people have had pretty much across the globe. And they had it because if they didn't survive. And that is respect for nature. Essentially, the love of the natural world that supports them, to use it sustainably, to honor the creature they just killed because it's going to enable them to eat. And if we think about, well, I'm trying to, people ask me, what are your religious beliefs? And it's a complicated question and they kind of change every day. But I think the indigenous folks had it right. Worship the nature that supports us. Just change the word God to nature. Is God forgiving? Is nature forgiving? Yes, but there's a limit. There's a limit. It's not, not all forgiving. You can't destroy God and then have it still work for you. So I've got a big whole analogy between what our Western religions, even some of the Eastern religions, say, versus what the indigenous people believe in terms of worshiping nature, and they're very, very similar. They're very, very similar. And if you didn't worship nature, if you didn't respect it, your ecosystem collapsed, and so did you. And that happened. I mean, that happened. But the ones that survived are the ones that treated it with respect. And we're not doing that now. So that's going way off on a limb here, but
No, I loved that answer that you gave because it had a nice breath to it and gave me some context, and I think I'm mostly aligned with what you're saying, so it's nice to hear another voice who has a similar perspective, especially someone who's been involved in this work for as long as you have. So thank you for sharing that. And I know we're nearing the end here, so I'm going to start to choose my questions carefully now. That's why I'm pausing a bit. One of the questions I had for you was, what is the most unexpected place insects have taken you? And maybe now is a good place for that question.
unexpected play. Well, insects took me to the world of conservation, took me back to it, empowered me to actually do something about it. Yeah, I watched the pond be buried with the bulldozer, but what did I do? I went on with my life and nothing for the next 40 years in terms of conservation. So insects brought me to the point where I can actually talk to the public and say, look, there are lots of important things you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a second part of that question that I can't remember now?
There's a follow-up that I have just listening to your answer, which is, it sounds like you're talking about, again, this ethic of care and wanting to do something and taking action and the sense of honor and responsibility, and all of these things are kind of swirling around. And I guess for someone listening who might resonate with that, knowing that these little creatures, little and big. When I was in Australia, there were some spiders that were bigger than my face. So sometimes these things are scary. So that these creatures are sacred and that they deserve our respect and dignity. What does care look like for creatures that we barely notice? Like, how do we embrace an ethic of care? I feel guilt if I have to kill a tick, if I pull a tick off me. And a lot of people would say that these are vile, dangerous, disgusting, scary creatures. And I could see that. Yeah, that's true. But it's also true that they value their own lives as much as I value mine, and that they're sacred and they deserve respect. So it's always this tension of like, okay, I guess I should kill this thing. But how can people practically honor the insects in their regions? Where I'm not advocating everybody protect the ticks, but what can they do when they hear this?
I had an interesting experience with a house finch that came to feeder in our yard, and it was a female, and she had a tumor on the back of her head that made her feathers stand straight up. She looked pretty funny, believe it or not, but it allowed us to identify that bird as an individual. It wasn't just a house finch. It could have been any house finch. It looked like she'd just been to the beauty parlor, so we called her Mrs. Quaff. But she came to the feeder for a year, and we always knew when she was there. We developed a personal relationship with her because we could identify that individual. The same way we do with our cats or our dogs, our parakeets. We know them as individuals, and therefore they become part of our tribe. That's when you develop that close emotional connection. So when you learn a lot about the natural world, you become closer and closer to identifying them as part of you. But being able to recognize an individual is critical to that. So if you think about the blue jay in your yard as the blue jay in your yard, it's your pet. It's your blue jay. You don't want something to happen to that blue jay. And just extend that to the rest of nature. That's where the caring comes from. We're very good at having pets. We love animals and we take care of them. And at the same time, we bury them with our bulldozers. It doesn't make any sense because we have no personal connection with the thousands of things that were killed in that pond when they did that. When you chop down that tree, all the things that are going to die, you have to realize what is in that tree before I chop it down. It could change our behaviors.
Yeah, thank you. That's really amazing. I'm really happy you said that. That's the perfect answer, in my opinion, because you inspired something that I remembered from reading the book, which was this realization as I was reading it that, wow, again, I'm going to be 40 years old. And some people could say, despite the fact that I'm now unemployed and living in a van, some people could say that I lived a successful life so far. I've been a good member of society. I'm a learned individual. But then I thought, yeah, in a specific field, but if you asked me to name 5 different trees around me or a dozen different insects or even to explain a certain phenomenon that I see all the time, I'd be unable to do it. I lack that basic literacy that I was speaking about before, which was a shocking realization where I was like, wow, how could I be a citizen of the world, an extension of nature, and feel so fractured and so separate from nature where I don't even know it anymore. I don't even know the names of these things, or that insects most of them are specialists and not generalists, these basic things. And I was thinking that, yeah, what a great antidote it would be to help reconnect with these things, one individual at a time, one non-human person at a time, because these things are persons, right? They have their own agency and intelligence and autonomy like we do. And so if we respect them and approach them on their terms and get to know them on their terms, this could help build that relationship, because it seems that we've lost this relationship with nature. And what you're advocating is to bring it back, get to know it again, reintroduce yourself, enter into good, respectful relation with nature.
Right. This is the change of culture that I'm advocating. The fact that you're 40 years old and you don't know these things is not your fault. You've lived in a culture that has not celebrated them and it's not passed them on. But I can tell the light bulb has gone off in your head. You're there. You can do it now. 40 is not that old, believe me.
Yeah, I feel old today, given the sickness and the lack of sleep and
Yeah.
all of that stuff. But I hear you. Now, as we get near the end here, I like to give the time back to you for the last however many minutes you need to either talk about something that you wanted to say or share and didn't have the space for, some event that you have coming up, or something that's going on that you want to draw people's attention to, or maybe where they could find you, or a song or a poem or a book recommendation, anything that you have.
I'm going to Atlanta tomorrow. No, don't. You can find me on email. That is the only place that I'm consistently in one place. But what I typically end at podcasts like this with is, I think, one of the most important messages, and that is pointing out that finding this sustainable relationship with nature is a responsibility. It is your personal responsibility. No matter where you live, whether you're in a city or not in a city, whether you own property or not, you can contribute to sustaining the ecosystems that sustain us. It's not an altruistic act. It is a selfish act. We all need to do this if we're going to be here in the future. If we don't care, if we just want to disappear from the planet, it'd probably be good for everything else if we did. But if you really want to maintain those genes in future generations, we're going to have to change the way we behave. And it is your personal responsibility to do that because you absolutely depend on it. And that is brand new news to an awful lot of people. I depend on nature. Yes, you do. And it's your responsibility to help save it, even if it's as simple as voting. Huge responsibility there. So that's what I do. I end with personal responsibility. Think about what you can do. If you do own a piece of land, there are 4 things that landscape ought to be accomplishing. It ought to be supporting pollinators. It ought to be supporting a food web. It ought to be sequestering carbon to help climate change. And it ought to be managing the watershed in which it lies. When you have an acre of lawn, it does none of those things. What can I do to change my property so that I'm addressing each one of those ecological goals? Everybody can do that. And again, if you don't own property, but you do own a balcony, you can help in that way with container gardening. And if you're on the 12th floor with no balcony, again, you can vote. Vitally important.
Thank you, Doug. This was a very enlivening conversation for me. I feel a little bit less sick after speaking with you. So that's an achievement. I want to thank you for your information, for your stories, for your time, for your humor, even in this conversation. I enjoyed it in the book, and I enjoyed it meeting you here as well. So thank you for the work that you've been doing for decades and that you continue to do, for your advocacy, for your activism, your books, your education, everything that you do. It's an honor to sit down and speak with you, and thank you for passing through today.
Well, I thank you too, because you're a big part of that advocacy. You're helping to pass this on.
Thank you for passing through today. Yeah, you, dear listener, thank you for your support, for your attention, for spending some time with me and this episode's guest. If you're enjoying this content, please subscribe, rate it, like it, tell your friends about it, buy a billboard somewhere next to a highway promoting it. I mean, I'm kidding, of course, but your support really does mean a lot to me. So thank you for listening, and I will talk to you next time.